Hello, beautiful beloveds. This is Stephanie Parasha, Divine Light, coming to you from New Zealand, Aotearoa, with the latest update. Again, my spirit guides have begun to journey me into the scientific realms, and I often resist this because I'm like, oh, I really do not have a scientific bone in my body. My brain finds it very hard to understand scientific information, and I protest and I say, why are you making me do this and try and understand this information? And I guess it is all about the balance, because we can live for a certain amount of our time, and I've spent a lot of my life very comfortable in the right hemisphere of my brain, knowing what I know and being, very comfortable in the realms of geography and sociology and psychology and English and even philosophy, the feelings and the emotions, very comfortable with all of that. But when it comes to maths and science, I really struggle ever since I was a child. Didn't really do very well at school in those subjects. And my spirit guides tell me there's a reason that I need to know this information. It's also because my role as a transmitter of information and disseminator of information means that those similar to myself that struggle with maths and science are able to understand the information that I hopefully will digest and simplify, so that it's a lot easier to understand and to make sense of in relation to specifically the twin flame journey. So some of the information that I've gained will be available in a lot more detail. I've put the links below this video so that you can go and research it a lot more. I'm not claiming to be an expert, so please excuse me if some of what I repeat to you is a little bit off, but what I'm trying to do is, like I said, digest the information in a way that it can relate on a practical level, day-to-day level, in terms of the twin flame journey and our ascension and our light work. So about a year and a half ago, I was given the name, a word, by Divine Spirit, my spirit guides, and I wrote it down on a piece of paper and actually didn't follow it up and never looked at it again. And I was doing a cleanup last week and clearing out all my paperwork, and I found this piece of paper and it had that word on it again, and it sort of jumped out at me, and I got told, you need to look that up. And it's been over a year now and you still didn't look that up. So I quickly got online and did some research, and the word that I was given was Hermetic, Hermetic, Hermetic Principles. Now, at that time, a year and a half ago, I was doing a lot of videos around the physics, the twin flame physics, and the physics part of where science and spirituality meet. And at that time, this information would have been really handy, because what I came to learn was that there are these 7 hermetic principles which are very much related to the physics and the science of the universe and how things operate. And they come from Hermes, or also known as Thoth. So they're from ancient Egypt and do not relate to any specific religion. They are more given as philosophy and handed down through. There was a book that was written, or the texts it's come from are referred to as the Kabbalion. So I do believe that the essence of what I want to draw out from these 7 principles, which I will just give a brief synopsis of, I'm just going to really briefly go through them, and how they relate each to the twin flame journey. What I want to sort of really pull out as the key, and which I actually highlighted when I was researching, was a statement, and I will just read it out. The truly wise, knowing the nature of the universe, use law against laws, the higher against the lower, and by the art of alchemy transmute that which is undesirable into that which is worthy, and thus triumph. Mastery consists not in abnormal dreams, visions, and fantastic imaginings or living, but in using the higher forces against the lower, escaping the pains of the lower planes by vibrating on the higher. Transmutation, not presumptuous denial, is the weapon of the master. Now, I copied that out, and then later on, as I was researching more, that statement had been highlighted by somebody else and saying that it would do well and for the student to commit this particular quote to their memory. And I thought, yep, there's a reason why I highlighted that statement, and the key word being transmutation and alchemy. So this process that we're going through, a lot of us, and more recently, have been talking about, that we thought this was all going to be love and beautiful golden rainbows and fluffy hearts, and we have since found out that we are journeying really deep into the depths of our subconscious, into those shadowy parts of the pains of childhood and past lives, and finding those old beliefs that have been stored away, those false beliefs that have been creating a lot of pain and resistance and suffering in our lives, and not many of us really recognizing or understanding the actual real purpose of this process. And I believe that through learning these hermetic principles, that it does give us the answer, because it talks about the transmutation process. And so I do want to hone in on that being an extremely important process for any Ascension light worker or twin flame. So getting onto the principles, again, if you want to know about this in much more detail, please go to the links that I've put below. I'll just say a little bit more about the transmutation process, which is a lot of the Hermetic principles often have related back to alchemy and transmuting metal into gold, when basically we change from one nature, form or substance into another, and transform. So this is really the key of understanding these principles, and what they're about is the transformation of transforming our mental states, which create our form and the matter around us and the conditions in which we live, into more positive states. So essentially the theme of the Hermetic Principles is all about the art of mental chemistry, or more of a mystic kind of form of psychology. So so let's get into the principles. And so please forgive me if I do not sound particularly philosophical, academic or scientific when I talk about these. I am trying to bring them down into a more realistic and understandable version, everyday version for us to understand. So the first principle is what they call the principle of mentalism. That goes back to the original form of how the universe was originally created, through a thought form, through the universal mind. Like, wow, wouldn't it be great if we just made such and such, or this or that? And how the universe came into being, into matter, was through a thought form. And I guess us being humans are an aspect of a thought form, and within us we also have an aspect of that ability to create through our own thought forms. And so be it. And so that is understanding that the mental aspect of the principle of the mental aspect is how things unfold in our lives, and how we will hold the key to our transformation is through understanding that it is through our thoughts in which we can overcome circumstances or matter, through gaining that mastery of the mental nature of how the universe works. Now, just a little addition here, and I have talked about this in my previous videos, is that may sound a lot to a lot of us like the law of attraction. So whatever we're thinking, we're creating, which is great if we're aware and conscious of our thoughts. Underneath that layer, beneath the iceberg of, below what we can see on the surface, is a whole realm and layer of many, many subconscious thoughts, old patterns and beliefs, and some thought forms that we haven't even realized are there, that we can't even catch because they've been hidden in the shadows. They're hidden beneath layers and layers of denial, or ego defense mechanisms that we can't even see. So those are the ones that a lot of us are up to dealing with right now. That's why we have come into that stage of our journey where a lot of us are going a lot more deeper to look at what's creating those thought forms, or what have we believed in that's creating that reality in our life where we're experiencing the pain and the suffering, continuing to do that. Let's really look at those beliefs and the thoughts. So that's creating our reality. The principle of correspondence is number 2, and the statement that goes with that is as above, so below, as below, so above. And we've heard that a lot. Just to unpack that a little more, is again the same type of mental aspect, knowing that whatever we're thinking is corresponding to what we're thinking. So it allows us to understand that there are planes beyond what we can see, and many of us have not even seen the reality of our existence. We've felt as if that what we're living is just something that's kind of being thrown at us, but actually it's corresponding a lot to and very much about what's going on in our mental aspect again. So it's all that mirror ball. I see the correspondence as being the mirror. So what we're experiencing on the inside and what we're believing on the inside, we'll see it on the outside. Okay. So number 3, the principle of vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything is vibrating. Majorly scientific explanation that we're all made up of atoms and molecules that are constantly vibrating at various different rates as well. So understanding the rates of intensity and how things are moving and on what vibration they're moving. And again, that will be relating back to what we're thinking and as to how we're vibrating and the frequency in which we're vibrating, and what we're attracting according to those. What I'm finding is, as I'm going through these principles, is that they all kind of overlap each other. So you'll find as we sort of go through them that there will be overlaps, and that's intended because it's almost like once you sort of realize one, that links into the other one. So the state of your being relates to the rate of your vibration again, and there are certain hermetic formulas apparently in which you can master and control your mental vibrations, therefore your whole atoms and molecules and everything. And again, it goes back to those laws before it as well. So I guess the example of that, I would say, that I've talked about in previous videos is recognizing, the effect that thoughts have on that water experiment, where the vibrations and molecules of the water change according to what the thoughts are. Everything's in motion, always moving. So there's always the ability to change. Okay, so recognize that as well. So where people tend to often get stuck in their own mental thought processes, I would say this would be our ticket out. It's like, okay, if you think about it, if you change your thoughts, you change your reality, you change your vibration, you change your experience. Everything's relating, corresponding. Okay, number 4, the principle of polarity. Now, I like this one because I feel like it totally relates to very much the twin flames. So everything has poles, a pair of opposites. And what I've found really interesting as I've delved into this is that we've always seen that one end and the other end are completely the opposite. Like they're totally different. But what this Hermetic principle takes it to another level, and it actually says that even though they are completely the opposite, they are the same thing but in differing degrees. And they use the example here of water is on one level of the polarity just liquid or even steam, and then on the other end of the polarity you've got ice, where it's hard and fixed. And it might look like those are completely the opposite things, but they're actually the same thing but different degrees of it. And there are places in which, according to, again, the transmutation process, there's a meeting place in the middle where the paradox, which they talk about as being the divine paradox of these extremes, that they may be reconciled, and there may be a place in which they meet. And so you can get a little bit in your head about when you read some of this stuff, and that's why I don't want to get into too much detail, because if you really start reading all the lines of information, it can get really so they talk about, like, if you look at a thermometer, where does heat begin and where does cold begin? There's a place in which they're both hot and cold, so then I guess the middle place is the warmth. And the other way in which I have come up with through reading this stuff is, like, you've got a place where the heat, which would look like the opposite of cold, the heat of the fire melts the ice, and then on the other extreme you've got the water, which puts out the fire, the cold water, which puts out the fire. So you can see how these two kind of can rotate around each other in terms of the effect they have on each other, and that one can either cancel out the other, or they can actually meet in a middle place in which neither exists, and yet at the same time they're existing. So this can take a lot of brain power to kind of unpack that polarity principle. However, it is a principle that exists, and the key part of that principle, which I believe exists for twin flames, and which I feel as if I've just been through myself, is transmuting the fears that I held inside myself into love. And I think, and that, we are doing that. We are transmuting. We've got these two polar parts of ourselves, like I talked about, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of my brain. It's like you wouldn't think that those two could possibly meet. But look, I'm here today. I never would have thought, my science and maths teachers never would have thought that I would be communicating to you this information. So I feel as if that is the meeting place between those two parts of my brain. Maybe we're talking about the marrying, or that sacred marriage. I will go into more of how that relates to gender, which is another principle, soon, in a minute. But so really just talking about how that polarity, there's a paradox and there's also a meeting place in the middle. Okay, so the fifth principle is the principle of rhythm. And when I think of this rhythm in the physical realms, I think of Newton's balls of perpetual motion, where you've got one banging into the other and the other one swings out like a pendulum, and then bang, it swings out the other way. And so the pendulum swing actually is a really good example of the rhythm, tides going in, tides going out, the rise and the fall, and the swing to the left, the swing to the right. Rhythm compensates, but again, it is quite a balance of rhythm. So the seasons are another amazing law in nature that demonstrates the principle of rhythm. Basically how that affects us as humans. We could be at the mercy of that experience. We could say, we're just, up and down, and many of us feel as if our life is like that, like it's just up and down, and we're in the light and then we're in the darkness, and it's a constant kind of polarity, kind of rhythmic cycle of, all of these things happening. And so the Hermetists believe, or they have attempted to overcome the effects of that sort of bobbing around on the ocean feeling, and they apply the mental law of neutralization. So they kind of say, I guess you could say, that no matter what comes to you, that it's all okay, that it's not one or the other, that's just a perception in some ways, and that there is that neutral sort of place, that not to see one thing as being good or bad. So not saying winter's better than summer, that they're both important and they're both equally as great, even though they're on opposite ends, and swing us back and forth into different realms, that we accept it. We pretty much, I would say acceptance comes in there. So accepting and acknowledging that. Number 6, the principle of cause and effect. So this is a really interesting one, because it basically says that everything, that you create is going to have an effect. So let's say your creation is a cause. So I would also say this relates to the laws of karma, so that everything is, you can't escape this law. So let's just think, if I do something and I think I might have got away with it. Like, let's say when I was a kid, I might have gone and stolen a bottle of milk from the neighbours and thought, yay, I've got away with that. Somewhere along the lines, there's going to be effect of that cause, and I will have to repay that in some way. So that's what we talk about when we're talking about karmic debts being repaid. And, again, if you see the balance and the tipping of the whole universe, and I'm seeing this in a bigger scale, this is not written in the information, but I'm actually seeing it in my mind right now. So that somewhere along the line, there's a payment. There's a payment for things that happen, whether it comes into this plane of existence or another plane of existence, that nothing escapes this massive universal law, and no one escapes. So the other thing that can happen with this is that humans generally have, I guess we've kind of been conditioned to believe that we are the effect of something bigger than that we do not have control over, that we're just these kind of pawns on the chessboard of life, and that there are bigger, more outward, larger causes than us moving us along, and that other people's, wills and desires and power creates us, gives us the effect of our lives. So this is coming more into understanding that if once we rise out of a certain level of thinking like that we can actually create our own reality and be the cause rather than the effect. So that's through higher consciousness, higher levels of awareness, and obeying that law, and actually living through it positively and creating positive effects through being, acknowledging that the power within ourselves to be the cause. So, hopefully that kind of explains it a little. And also, I guess, in some ways, having the awareness to know when we're paying something back, or that something that's happened in a past life, for example, that, we must pay our dues and get that over and done with. And I feel as if relating to certain timelines closing down, that's not necessarily fitting within the Hermetic principle, but I do feel it's related to the vibrations. So if those of us that are trying to move into higher vibrations, higher mental planes of existence, then it's important that we make sure that our karma is cleared, basically. And I try and simplify that, and just, I make sure that I try and do good, not create any more bad karma, hopefully, through good thoughts, through positive thoughts, and the power, again, of your mind to have the awareness over what's going on. Okay, now the 7th and final principle is the principle of gender, and I'm sure Twin Flames will love this one the most. I do, although it doesn't say this in the texts that I've read, that it is really that a yin and yang. So everything has a masculine and feminine. Again, that I do think this is quite similar to the polarity law. So basically people have got confused about this one, and I think that this has been a little bit warped due to probably the imbalances on the planet, and again through the creations of reality, through many people thinking those same thoughts, therefore creating a plane of existence that's become so material and so heavy in matter because so many people are thinking that way. That this is more about the balance of the masculine and feminine within the self, and acknowledging that the masculine and the feminine exists within one being as well as in everything. So yeah, so a little bit more research probably to do around the principle of gender. I'm very curious to learn more about it, but I just wanted to bring these principles into your awareness in terms of really highlighting the key theme of the transmutation process within these laws, and that we essentially, in summary, have the power within our own mind if we access those and unlock those parts of our mind, those subconscious parts of our mind, and move those thoughts into mastery thoughts of a positive creation, and of recognizing that although we live in what appears to be a duality existence with those two opposites on the polarities and the magnetics and the positive and the negative, even within our whole being, we've got that with our protons and neurons and electrons all operating to continue that belief in that those laws, that we can balance those. We can balance those within ourselves. And I think this is really what we're coming to, and this information is coming more and more to light as we continue with our journey. I'm sure there's people out there that have a lot more knowledge about this than me, but I'm just being asked to share what I've learned with you, and the hope that it may help you. So I will leave it there, and I thank you very much for listening and for sharing and subscribing and liking, and for your comments. I really appreciate it. And so I'm wishing you well on your journeys and sending you out lots of love and light, and I will be with you again very soon. Okay, bye for now.